So that means we've got two speakers in this session. One is Tony Gosling. Someone I know, Thomas mentioned, 9/11. I've worked with him on his platform, educating many people. So Tony is a ex-BBC journalist, radio journalist, and he is very, very active. He's got his own radio show. I'm not doing justice to his books, but he will be given 30 minutes. And I think I gave the title earlier, and maybe he can remind me. So Tony will be first, and then Simon, he will give the Christian pair, which got a bit messed up with the African Christian brother. I forgot to bring in Anglican Canon, Peter Challen. He's still alive, a message from him. So then it will be Dr. Simon Murwitt from the Christian Council on Moral Justice on the Global Political Economy and the Global Reset. So over to you, Tony. You can introduce yourself a bit more, and you've got 30 minutes. Over to you.
Well, I'd rather do a bit shorter than 30, and then
that's fine. That's fine.
And let's have questions. You mentioning Peter Challen there takes me back to the 1980s, the Christian Council for Monetary Justice in central London, which used to meet very regularly, looking at the geopolitical effects of the financial system. Now, of course, we are right now living in a sort of end game of that financial system, which is saying to people here in the UK, and obviously everywhere else in the world, but in the UK specifically, that you're not going to actually own your house anymore or own your car anymore. You are going to have to hire it and rent it off of a sort of empire of some sort, which is a financial empire based in the City of London. And if they decide that you're not worthy of having the money, or they think you're spending your money in the wrong fashion, they will just be able to switch this off. Now, this is what's called the central bank digital currencies, as well as programmable money. So it's great that you mentioned Peter, and thank you, Moeen, for letting me sort of stand in at the last minute. I'm quite a busy freelance journalist, and I think, I'm frustrated that so many journalists just don't touch on the big issues that we're talking about today, of what we used to call in the old days of the 9/11 Truth campaign in the UK, where I first met Moeen, we used to call it the bigger picture, because the journalists around the world are just focusing on individual events like this. For example, this attack we've had today in Australia on Bonsai Beach, but they don't look at how this fits in the wider picture. And so for me, as a former mainstream media journalist, with an audience, I'll say, of millions of people listening to our BBC radio station in London, which was called Greater London Radio, which I was very much at the sort of cutting edge, at the cold face of getting newsworthy individuals, people involved in news stories, literally speaking live to London. And the problem is the bigger picture is never there. So that's really what I want to focus on, and how this fits in with eschatology. Moeen and I over the years have been discussing quite a lot of the similarities between Christian eschatology and Islamic eschatology. And also, of course, in the background to all of this, you've got Jewish eschatology. So it seems to me very obvious now that some of the people over the centuries in the ruling elite, and of course the British with their empire, made a pretense of Christianity. And of course they were, to a certain extent, spreading Christianity around the world. But at the end of the day, if you look at the British royal family, really from the Middle Ages, you will find witchcraft at the heart of it. You will find that, for example, the Knights Templar, the Order of the Garter, are all arranged around witchcraft and secrecy. So the idea is, take this old Canaanite idea, Phoenician idea, and you have at the top a cult, effectively. The outside garments, or as you might see the Vatican, for example, of something Christian, but at the heart of it is actually something that's not like that at all. And we had, in the Elizabethan era, we had John Dee, who was the magician to Queen Elizabeth, cooking up this idea. And you can actually go onto the Greenwich Royal Maritime Museum website and see that it was John Dee and his friends in the Elizabethan times that cooked up this concept of the British Empire. And this was really sending the Royal Navy around to bully and intimidate around the world under the guise, at least for the British people, thought it was all about spreading the Christianity. And with that came this idea that the land that we take is God's land. And therefore, we can now sort of buy it and sell it to our friends. And so this claim to the world and the empire, which still exists in the United States, in Canada particularly, and Australia, the Commonwealth countries, is actually a claim of ownership of the earth. And that's really what D and the empire was all about. So Christianity was just a patina, thin veil on the outside of it. So when we come up to the 21st century, we had this attempt on the September the 11th to define the 21st century in 2001 with the September the 11th attacks, which were carried out mainly by the Anglo-Zionist Empire cult within United States, Britain, and Israel to benefit Israel and to start the process of the United States building up this new Crusader state. So the idea is what you do is you simply rejuvenate this concept of the medieval Templars and the mission to the Holy Land to try and take over the Holy Land, which was pushed back by Saladin and the Muslims back in the Middle Ages. And of course, the Templars were then exposed by the French as a satanic cult. They weren't actually Christian knights at all. And so in the 21st century, the idea is we really are now going to go for it. So the way I see it, and I have seen it really ever since the 1990s, is you've got the playing out now of much of the content of the book of Revelation right in front of our eyes, on our news screens and on the television day to day. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you can hear and see exactly what's going on. So the discussion in Revelation, which was given to John, the Apostle John, on the island of Patmos, is, for example, the mark of the beast. Now, I see it every day in front of me. When I use a credit card, it goes bleep, and there's a little chip in there that transfers money. If I'm paying by card, I tend to prefer using cash myself. But anyway, so you can see everyone doing this. A little microchip, which is how we buy and sell. And of course, who owns that microchip? Who's in control of that microchip? Who's in control of the money? It's not you. And we're moving towards actually now what is an Egyptian system of money where you don't actually own anything of value. You don't own any gold. You don't own a receipt, which you can then swap for gold. You're just part of a credit system, which is controlled by these central banks. And there are many other things in the book of Revelation too, which is for me the central text here. And people may know that there were big attempts over the centuries with the Council of Nicaea, etc., to keep the book of Revelation out of the Bible. Some people said, oh, it's nothing to do with Christianity, etc. And, that's a whole issue in itself. Which books are in the Old Testament, the pseudepigrapha, and the New Testament, apocrypha? The Catholics have got a completely different Bible, really, to the Protestants. And so then there's, more interestingly, though, you have these figures in Revelation. You have the Antichrist, who is a political leader, and you also have the false prophet, who is a spiritual leader in the end times. And that seems to me is where we're heading now, is towards a rule by a very powerful political figure who brings peace to a troubled world. So that's essentially what you've got in. There's also this very curious and interesting aspect to Revelation, which talks about the image of the beast. And what it looks like, if you read the actual Revelation texts, is it looks like some sort of animated statue which speaks, almost like a kind of Elon Musk robot that will, and I suppose like the cult at Delphi, the idea is you go and you ask this amazing AI monster what's going on, and it tells you, and it tells you the truth. But of course, the fact of the matter is that the algorithms in whatever this AI speaking image of the beast will be controlled by the elites, the Elon Musks, the Peter Thiels. And over the centuries, of course, we've come to this through something called the Enlightenment, which was the explosion of science, mostly in the 18th, 19th century. But there is this document, which was written by an old school friend of mine back in the 1970s. I was friendly with him. He's now a very important figure in accelerationism, and he's recently hinted Satanism too. So this is a guy called Nick Land. He's a philosopher based in Shanghai, and he's written a lot of things over the years. He's talked about as the father of accelerationism, which is the accelerating the end of the world. This is a movement which is subscribed to by people like Peter Thiel, Yuval Noah Harari, Elon Musk. The idea is to cause crises in countries and then create a solution to the crisis, which makes things worse, as we've seen. Perfect example is COVID, with the COVID vaccination jabs actually causing possibly more injuries in the long term than experimenting on humans. And so that, to me, is important to understand that that you have this dark enlightenment. That's what Nick has penned. The idea is that computers are going to take over everything. Humans are going to become nothing, basically, just do what they're told. And the reason is because people are irresponsible. We're going to have to hand over to computers. So that's another aspect of the end of the world. There is obviously hope involved in all of this, but essentially I think what we're looking at now is a cult, a financial cult, a spiritual satanic cult, which is very powerful here in Britain. I mean, David Livingstone, who I interview quite regularly, probably every few months on my program, pointed out last week on my program that the Illuminati, which was formed in the late 1700s, the guy that helped out the Illuminati guy, Adam Weishaupt, the founder, was the Duke of Suffolk. His name was George Saxe-Coburg. He was the grandfather of Prince Albert, who married Queen Victoria. And of course, a direct descendant is Prince Charles, now King Charles, the British King. So this is a small group of people who have got immense power. They control appointments to elite institutions like army, police, judges, journalists, of course, as well, editors, at the top of our mass media, which is speaking to millions of people and bamboozling millions of people. And so you can see there's a tiny number of people, but I would really suggest that people do look at this dark enlightenment. It kind of explains in a nutshell how the end of the world is going to be precipitated. And the people like Musk follow this, and Thiel, because they don't really believe in God. Their attitude is, well, we can actually be in control of humanity at this point. So you can go right back to the 1960s and Ian Fleming's book, Dr. No, and the film Dr. No, where you get the bad guy in there, the baddie, saying world domination, same old dream. And of course, these people do because once they've got money, once they've got wealth, what they want to do with that wealth is just to gain power and more power. And that means excluding the rest of the population. Of course, this is totally against God's will. It's not kindness. It's not celebrating creation. It's taking over creation. It's destroying creation. And we've been hearing quite a lot about false flag attacks. This is how they do these sorts of things. So you often hear individuals are involved in some terror incident. I've covered very thoroughly the 9/11 attacks. We know that this was Israeli inspired, British aided, American aided. So you've got all these dual Israeli-American citizens involved in the 9/11 attacks. My specialism really is the 7/7 attacks, which were in 2005 in London. We proved that the Israelis had been down the tube tunnels the night before, almost certainly planting bombs underneath tube trains. And then when the bombs went off, the individuals who were supposed to be on those tube trains, there was no CCTV coverage anywhere. All of it pointed back really to Israel and the military publishing organization called Elsevier, who had been running an exercise that day at the same places where these bombs blew up. And so these are attacks carried out by the deep state. The idea is to blame the Muslims, and we're looking at a very similar sort of a situation now to what we had in the 1930s Nazi Germany, with the Muslims being blamed in a similar sort of way as the Jews were blamed by Hitler back then. So, of course, we saw mass deaths in labor camps, in concentration camps by the Nazis. That effectively meant that those Jews in Europe, and remember, it was the whole of Europe was occupied, those Jews who had refused to go to Israel, be Zionists, those were the ones who were interned and killed by the Nazi regime. And also, if I can just sort of wind up on this bigger picture of why we are heading right now, quite soon, I would say, I don't know how many years, but they're getting quite close to it, to an Armageddon scenario where we will have a World War III. And after that World War III, an Antichrist will appear as a peacemaker. It seems to me pretty obvious that's what they're planning. And Adolf Hitler was, Dennis Wheatley said this, who's a great writer who was involved in the World War II, and he wrote loads of books about the occult too as well. Brilliant writer. He explained that Hitler was a prototype for the Antichrist. So if you could imagine an Adolf Hitler who's very well spoken, very convincing, actually quite nice and kind sounding. Obviously, Hitler was a bit of a screamer and a ranter, but that's, I think, what we're facing in the future, and that will, of course, precipitate. At least that's what they plan and hope will precipitate the abolition of the Abrahamic faiths and the institution of a pantheistic, man-made New Age religion. That's what they hope, because they're going to use the excuse that all these Abrahamic faiths are the enemy, and that's what's caused World War III. You know, Jews, Christian, Muslims, they've all got to go. We need to have a nice new man-made religion. That is going to be their gambit, and that is something which was set out, as I'm sure some of you know, back in 1871 by a guy called Albert Pike, who was the Grand Master of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And Albert Pike, he explained there were going to be three world wars. The First World War was for the British to take over the Holy Land. And if you go and look it up, you'll find with the Balfour Declaration and the taking of Palestine up to the level of Damascus, that was the end of the First World War. So in a way, the trench warfare in Europe was a complete distraction. The whole point was that the British had to take over Palestine. And then, of course, the Second World War was, the idea was to clear the way for the Zionist state to be instituted in 1948. And I'll just wind up by saying that people don't necessarily understand why the Israelis and the Mossad didn't really go after Nazi war criminals, because many of them did escape. And this was because Victor Rothschild in London, who had been helping Stalin massively through the war. He was a spy. If you ever want to read Roland Perry's book, The Fifth Man, he was spying for the Russians and, well, particularly for the Soviet Union and Stalin, on all the British intelligence during World War II, when he was working at MI5. And then after the war, in the Cold War, Victor Rothschild was spying for the Soviet Union in MI6. So he was a massive spy. It was very embarrassing in the 1980s. He was outed as a Soviet spy, and the book by Roland Perry explains it all. But he was putting pressure on the Russians to make sure that the vote went through in 1948 for the creation of the State of Israel. On the other side of the Atlantic, you had Nelson Rockefeller, who was the attaché. He had some role anyway. I'm not sure, maybe not an attaché, but a special ambassador to South America. And it was him that delivered these South American votes at the United Nations for the creation of the State of Israel on a promise with Ben-Gurion. He said to Ben-Gurion, and this was told to me by John Loftus, who wrote The Secret War Against the Jews, and he was a special FBI investigator who saw all these secret files. Nelson Rockefeller said to Ben-Gurion, he said, you can have a state or vengeance, but not both. And so at that point, Ben-Gurion said, well, actually, we want a state. And so the agreement was at the very top level of the new Israeli state that there would be no pursuing Nazi war criminals. And the reason for that is the topic of my book, the traitors of Arnhem, the Martin Bormann and the Bilderberg group. The reason for that was because the looted wealth of the Second World War in Europe had been squirreled away by Bormann. The British helped him escape, Desmond Morton, Churchill's private secretary, to South America, and this was used to create a financial Fourth Reich. So, of course, the British and the Americans didn't want the Israelis going after some of these Nazi war criminals who, through Operation Paperclip and other means, had been gotten out. And the key thing that they did with this financial Fourth Reich, is many of these companies are very powerful today, is they put Jewish individuals in as chairman of these companies in order to disguise the fact that it was Nazi money that have been used to get these companies going. And those multinational corporations are incredibly powerful today, financial and industrial. They're basically become a massive monopoly. And so my websites, I'll just say something about my show, which is at thisweek.org.uk. It's every week. We do a program. I've just had Brian Baletic on, who's excellent, land destroyer, who writes for New Eastern Outlook this week, and various other individuals. But the website, bilderberg.org, is another website, and the old forum we used to use in the 9/11 Truth campaign, that's still up there too. And finally, most importantly, I think for this presentation, my YouTube channel, Geopolitics and the Occult, has got lots and lots on this particular topic of eschatology and where we are today and how we can, in a way, best protect our kids by educating the next generation as to what this tiny satanic elite are really up to. Thank you, Moeen, for letting me have my say. And I'm happy if we've got any more time for questions.
Yeah, brilliant, Tony. Very succinct, to the point. It's a great shame that some of the other speakers, they touched on some of the topics, but then had to go. And because this is a dilemma here, you've got experts in different parts of the world. For instance, Matt Errett, I think you would get on very well with him. He's, what's the word, explosive, volcanic, and complementary in terms of, some of the work you're doing, but it would be, blending together. Because
well, he and Cynthia Chung,
yes,
and David Livingston are all in Montreal, and I'm not sure if he's in Montreal. Cynthia is, and these people are doing absolutely, I think, that some of the best work, along with Dan Dix in Canada. I think, the British, at least we've seeded something in Canada, which is, it's like the South Africans in the case against Israel at the International Criminal Court. So at least the British have seeded some independent-minded. Of course, another one is Singapore. Another one is Malaysia, Malaya rather. So there are all sorts of places around the world. The British at least have got, they started off something which has become independent-minded and making an important contribution. But the Canadians have done an amazing job in getting on top of what's really going on in the world today. It would be lovely to see them on the mass media, but of course they will never do that. The people who own those transmitters are determined to keep everybody stupid. That's now their main objective. Yeah,
well, look, I take it you have to leave, Tony, is that right? Yeah?
I can stay here for another 15, 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, okay, what I'll do is chairman's prerogative, because there's the two others actually are here. Simon, obviously, on the Global Reset, and our Professor Imtiaz, I can see he's joined us on Kashmir and Israel. That's going to be very interesting to tie the dots. So what I'm going to do, you mentioned, I'll take 10 minutes of questions, and then you can go. And you're going to get a shot. You mentioned British Canadians. We got one waving his hand. And I don't know if you know him, but he is a polymath. He was introduced to me, that's another story, by another polymath, Dr. Carl Shapley, some connections with Einstein. I mean, what an amazing guy. New World Education Foundation. I think he introduced me to Dr. Thomas Daffin. You know, what can I say about him? Polymath. He's waving his hand, and I'm going to give him the pleasure. He's from the International Institute for Global Peace and Philosophical Studies Link. So, Thomas, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, thanks.
Right, fire away, fire away.
Yeah, I found, well, Tony's presentation very interesting. I just wanted to make a couple of comments to it.
But please feel free. Right, go.
Yeah. Firstly, it's a great shame Tony didn't hear my talk earlier and my comments, because I made a specific point about the role of the devil in eschatology. And unfortunately, you know, you weren't there. I hope you listened to the recording of this event, because what I have to say is, you know, follows on from the point I made, which is that in eschatological discourse, you know, whether it's Islamic, Jewish, Christian or others, the devil has a key role. He's like one of the starring actors. And I was calling for a scientific approach to this. I've written a book called Comparative Diabology, in which I'm asking for an interfaith study of the devil's role in world cosmologies, including Zoroastrianism, which is one of the grandfathers of our Western or Eastern or thinking about the devil. You know, we need to actually study this properly and academically. You've introduced into the discourse a new form of satanic theory, which is very popular at the moment in certain, I don't know, New Age circles. I don't quite know how to describe it. We can get onto that. Which is this idea of what you call a satanic cult. Now, this is very common. We saw this with the QAnon phenomena. We saw it in the some of the antecedents of the MAGA cult, that there's a dangerous, liberal, scary Illuminati running the world, and they're all devil worshippers, and God has sent us Trump to take them down. This is a sort of meme that I actually oppose. I find it very...
Well, so do I. So do I,
so,
yeah.
Okay, so what you were saying with this idea of a diabolic cult that's running the British Empire and so on, I just want to call you out on that, because a few years ago when I lived in Wales, I ran a couple of symposiums dedicated to Dr. John Dee, who's one of my intellectual heroes. And I would like to just say, there's no way Dee was a Satanist. He was a highly intellectual man. He was a mathematician, a Cambridge graduate. His vision was for a world of peace and justice. And what he meant by the British Empire, the British Commonwealth, was a million miles away from what it's become in the wrong hands. And he was, so anyway, that's just the first point I want to make. Dee was actually a Druid as well as a Christian. And so what I think, what is missing from your analysis, if I may be so bold, is an understanding of the Celtic traditions of Druidry and what they stood for. They stand for peace and non-violence. I've written the first and only encyclopedia of Druid studies. As an academic, I'm the first guy to write that. And I happen to be the Archdruid of Britain in the peace department. So I would regard myself as a Christian Druid. And I would like to disassociate that tradition from any aspersion of Satanism. I think it's an insult to the genuine pagans of Europe and Britain who don't worship any kind of satanic figure. There is no Satan in Druidry or paganism. That is an insult hurled at them by Christians during the time of persecution. So I think we would have, there isn't time to do it justice now, but there's a lot of untangling to do here to really get to the roots of this. And I don't think it... Anyway, listen to what I said earlier about trying to be... The most important thing Dee did was to help spur the scientific revolution. One of his best friends, Robert Record, invented the equal signs. These guys were pioneering algebra. They were working with Elizabethan academics and Sir Francis Bacon. So there, unfortunately, you know, a lot of people like to throw mud at these people. Dee's library was set on fire by a mob who accused him of being a devil worshipper when he came to Europe. Intellectuals often get attacked by the mob. Joseph Priestley had the same problem, co-discoverer of oxygen. So I think one just needs to do one's homework a bit. And there are negative forces. Now, what I said in my thing is we have to attack ignorance. We have to revision the way we look at eschatology. We're not up against actual devil worshippers or devils. We're up against ignorance. And so, I mean, just to sum up, Tony, what would you say, in a nutshell, is the solution? How can we advance wisdom on this planet? Because I'm also totally at variance with your idea that they, by which you mean the satanic cult, are planning World War III, and there's nothing we can do about it. As a peace,
well, I don't think there is anything we can do, because I mean, I can go into that a bit more if you want, but I mean, with D, I never said, I don't think I said anyway, I hope I didn't, that he was a Satanist. There is, of course, a cult at the very top of power, which particularly involves the royal family and the deep state and a whole bunch of powerful actors that are behind the scenes. They're not the sort of people you will see on television. But I mean, and also I wouldn't bring myself low enough to talk about I must educate you, and I have the facts and you don't. That sort of language, because, for example, with Cecil Rhodes, I mean, he's a similar sort of figure to D when it comes to the empire. In the 1900, Rhodes was convinced that it would be a wonderful thing to spread the empire they were at the point where they thought the British Empire could now take over the world. And so he set up, with the Rhodes legacy, the Round Table groups, and these are similar sorts of figures, people who possibly and likely actually had good intentions, but there were others behind the scenes that wanted to use those ideas of D and Rhodes for their own agenda. And possibly, D, possibly Rhodes, were just duped by people to think, well, this is a very powerful, wonderful thing we could create here. But somebody else has decided we're going to use this for our own ends. So I think there's a really good and actually fascinating discussion to be had between you and I at some other point about, what is really going on here. Because quite clearly we are now in a situation where, whether it's designed to scare the whole world into, like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, into thinking there's going to be a massive conflagration between China and the United States or Russia, or whoever, that could actually happen, and there are people, I think, who are hell-bent on making it happen. If you look at what's going on in the world today, particularly out of the Israel-Palestine crisis, but obviously Europe and Russia too, is the whole world is literally being now forced to take sides, whether it's India, Pakistan, whether it's Australia, China, every country now, Iran, has to be one side or the other. The United States are making it impossible for small countries like, for example, for Malaysia, to just be really independent. And this is a major part, I think, of the build-up to, and I would say, inevitable Third World War. Which will certainly happen. Now, I it's just that I've been following this since the 9/11 attacks quite closely, looking at what's going on behind the scenes, and we are literally now financially and militarily on the brink. So a little bit of a push, and this really will spread mass chaos right across society. Certainly here in the Western world, there may be places like New Zealand that don't get too badly affected by things, but that's where I think they brought us. And this is expressed, I think, in the UK here. Maybe we're at the cutting edge, maybe we're an exception, actually. But you see lots of people expressing angst. They're not sure about the future. They're not sure if they can keep paying their mortgage, keep their home. They're on the edge. Taxes are going up all the time. They're finding it impossible to have children because they can't feed the kids. They won't have enough security for the children in the future, and the screws are really on here in the UK. Sure. Anyway, so that's my answer, and I'd love to have a further discussion. I don't want to bog everyone else down with this.
But let's just agree on one thing, just to finish. We are trying to stop World War III. I just want to make. I'm a peace scholar.
Yes, of course.
So I don't accept the inevitability of world destruction through a nuclear war. my job as president of Philosophers for Peace in Europe is to prevent it. And my interest in an eschatology of peace, I hope you listen to my talk, is how we can steer it in that direction. And, so anyway, thank you.
Well, that's taken as read. I hope you're familiar with Nick Land and the Accelerationists. He's a Nietzschean philosopher, and I knew him as a school kid when I was 15 years old. And he's now very, very influential, massively influential in Shanghai on the techno, I suppose you'd call it, feudalism. I think this is what Yanis Varoufakis calls it, techno-feudalism, this idea of owning everyone and everything through technology.
That's shocking, yeah. We did hear from this Canadian guy talking about it. So thank you very much, Tony, anyway.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. I mean, that's good. There is obviously some differences of opinion there. And I don't want to intervene, I could say a lot, but that was great.